This is the Musical Fidelity A1, an integrated amplifier that was originally launched all the way back in 1985, and it was popular for its Class A sound, even though it's technically a Class AB amp. Now, I'll dive into those details in just a moment, but what you need to know up front is that it offers 25 watts per channel into 8 ohms, and retails for just under $1,800 US. Now, first, I'm going to quickly go over the history of the A1 with you all. So, as I just mentioned, it was launched in the mid-1980s, and it was designed by an audio engineer named Tim. I can't really pronounce his last name, and I'm not going to butcher it. The bottom line is, he was a man who was very popular for his tube amp designs, and unsurprisingly, the A1 became celebrated for having an almost tube-like sound. There was just one problem, however. The A1 runs very hot, and at the time, Musical Fidelity cheaped out on the parts, making the A1 very prone to breakdowns, and it was just known as being an unreliable product. But that was then, so now it's time to talk about what Musical Fidelity has done with the new iteration of the A1. So Musical Fidelity relaunched the A1 in 2023, and the goal was to preserve the original circuit and sound, all the while improving upon it in meaningful ways. What that means is, in terms of reliability, the current A1 now features a larger chassis with better ventilation, and it now uses parts on the inside that are spec'd to tolerate the heat. In terms of performance, the A1 now comes with a higher quality volume control, an improved phono stage, the doubling of the filter capacitance bank, and it now comes with a button on the front that attenuates gain by 10 dB, which allows it to better accommodate today's high-gain digital sources. Now, in terms of aesthetic and function, it's still a very minimalist, industrial-looking piece. In fact, the only built-in feature you get is a moving magnet, moving foil phono stage, which unfortunately I wasn't able to test, but it seems to be well regarded in terms of sound quality. The entire top plate is what serves as the heatsink for this integrated amp, and on the front, we just have our typical power button, a volume control, and a selector switch, and then we'll also have our 10 dB gain adjustment. So this is going to be it for the front of the piece, so now it's time to take a look at the back. Okay, so I'm going to have you guys look at a picture for this section just because it's going to be easier for you to see. So what you're going to notice on the back is a tape in and out. There's going to be a variable pre-out, which means, yes, you can use a subwoofer with the A1. You get 4 analog inputs, and of course there's going to be our input for the phono stage. So very simple stuff. Now let's go ahead and take a look on the inside. All right, here's the inside of the A1, so let's go ahead and talk about what you get with it. To the left, there's a toroidal transformer that features dual winding. Then you have 80,000 microfarads of filter capacitance, which is pretty good for something in this price range. To the right, you'll see the phono stage. And I couldn't help but notice the discrete left and right circuitry in this amp, which is always a good thing to see. There's our Alps volume control, and I believe the A1 comes with 4 bipolar junction transistors, which are attached to this heatsink, and if you're wondering what this white stuff is, that's just thermal paste. So now let's have a detailed conversation about the biasing of the A1, because I don't see too many people talking about it. So here's how it breaks down. If you connect this to speakers that are 8 ohms or higher, the A1 will deliver 20 watts of Class A power to those speakers. However, if you hook the A1 up to speakers that are rated at 4 ohms, that's when it will deliver 10 watts of Class A power to those speakers, with the remainder sliding into AB operation. So if you're a little bit confused by this, that's okay. I'll have an image on the screen for you to look at, so hit pause if you want to fully understand how the A1 delivers power to your speakers. With that said, I got to give credit where credit's due. It looks like Musical Fidelity really did honor the original circuit while making meaningful improvements. So hats off to Simon the engineer and Heinz the owner of Musical Fidelity. It looks like you guys did the thing. But now it is time to talk about maybe the most important part of the A1, which is what this all means in terms of performance. Let's talk about that. Okay, so conclusion first. When it comes to performance, what you're getting out of the A1 is a solid state amp that sounds like a really good tube amplifier. The overall sound is on the warm side of neutral. It features slightly rolled off treble, yet at the same time, the sound is very expressive and features gorgeous sounding mid-range. I don't mind saying that subjectively speaking, it's some of the best mid-range that I've heard from a hi-fi product in this price range. Now, I'll get to those details in just a moment, but first, let's quickly go over who stands the best chance of enjoying the A1 and who will likely hate it, starting with those of you who would probably really enjoy it. In my opinion, it is best for the music file. For somebody who is done with thin sounding or bright sounding hi-fi components, you're done with analyzing the sound of the gear, and you just want to have fun listening to your music again. If that's you, and you don't need a lot of power, you don't need a lot of features, and you like the idea of a tube-like sound from a solid-state amp, then there's a really good chance you're going to love the A1. Having said that, however, it's not for everybody. So for starters, if you're somebody who believes that a good amplifier is one that passes the signal from point A to point B with no alterations at all, you are going to hate the A1 because it has a very colorful sound. Next, if you're somebody who's all about speed and dynamics and you want all the detail, then the A1 is going to be a very easy pass for you. And it's also not good for those of you who need a lot of power or value a lot of features. And it's also not great for those of you who are worried about your power bill when the amplifier's on, or for those of you who plan on leaving your amp on for the entire day. If you check off any of those boxes, then yeah, go ahead and skip the A1. However, if it sounds like something you would be interested in, then stick around as I dive into the details to see if this really is the right fit for you. Okay, so let's dive into the details, starting with the sonic character of the A1 first. Now, it's really interesting because you're getting a product that's full of contrasts. For example, even though the A1 is very slim, the sound it delivers is much larger and more muscular than you would expect. And then when it comes to the sonic character, even though it resides on the warm side of neutral, this isn't some laid-back sounding piece. Instead, what you're getting is a warm yet vivid sound. It's almost like somebody took a really good tube amplifier and then stuck it inside of an already good solid-state amplifier. Now, to help you make sense of what I just said, let's dive into the details, starting with the treble. So the treble is going to be just a little bit rolled off, but not in the way that's going to take bright speakers and bright recordings and make them sound smooth. Instead, it's just going to take a little bit of the edge off of the upper high frequencies. Now, there is a trade-off with this. For example, this isn't going to be the most detailed, airy, and spacious and refined sounding integrated amp that you're going to hear at this price range. But what it will give you is treble that strikes this balance between not being too bright, but not being too dull either, unless your speakers already feature rolled off treble, in which case it may be too dull for you. But for most people, it's going to strike that balance just fine. And subjectively speaking, even though the treble's a little rolled off, I feel like what the Musical Fidelity does give you is this great grit behind the sound of instruments, behind live recordings. It helps to add to a sense of realism to the sound that you hear without being over the top like a lot of hi-fi components. Now, let's move on and talk about the mid-range, because boy, the mid-range is why you want to check out the A1. It's very unique. It gives you this tube-like three-dimensionality that almost no solid-state amp that I've heard in this price range is able to deliver. And not only that, it gives you this huge sense of scale. It does the audiophile things very well by sounding very balanced, detailed, with great detail separation. On warm-sounding speakers, it may sound just a little bit thick, but for most of you, the mid-range is going to be absolutely gorgeous. Think of it like an affordable version of Acuphase. Next, let's move on and talk about the bass. So how you experience the bass is going to depend on the speakers that you use. For example, if you're running efficient speakers, then the bass is going to take on the same character as the mid-range. It's going to be punchy, yet at the same time fast. However, if your speakers are of average sensitivity, then the bass is going to focus more on speed than giving you more of a visceral experience. And it's the same story with dynamic output. With efficient speakers, the A1 sounds very dynamic, but on average sensitivity speakers, then it's decent up into a certain volume, which I think for most people will probably be 85 or 90 dB. Now, because speaker matching is so important with the A1, let's go ahead and tackle that subject next. Okay, so when it comes to finding the right speakers for the A1, there are three things that you need to bear in mind. And the first is actually some really good news, which is, despite the biasing and limited power output out of the A1, I found that the overall presentation is consistent across a wide variety of speakers. Meaning, it doesn't matter if you own warm-sounding speakers or bright-sounding speakers, or if they're efficient or inefficient, the overall sonic character of the A1, by which I mean that warm yet vivid sound, is going to be heard through all of them. Having said that, that leads me to point number two, which is, As is the case with most low power amplifiers, you're going to get the most out of it when you use it with speakers that are very easy to drive, speakers that don't need a lot of power. Think Klipsch Heritage series, Mission 700 series, MoFi Source Point, speakers like that. Speakers that are rated at around 90 dB in sensitivity with an impedance that doesn't really drop below 6 ohms. If that's what you're running, then you're going to get the most out of the A1 because not only will you get the sonic traits that I just described, but you will also be able to get really strong bass output, really strong dynamic output with the ability to listen at very loud volumes. Having said that, however, you don't need efficient speakers to get really good sound out of the A1. And that leads me to the third point, which is, yes, you can run 4 ohm speakers on it and get great sound. They don't have to be very efficient. For example, some of the best sound that I've heard out of the Dynaudio Special 40s is through the A1, and that's not a very easy speaker to drive. You just need to be aware of the fact that if you use speakers like that, then you're going to be limited in terms of how loud you can listen, as well as how much bass and how much dynamics you're going to experience out of your system through the A1. Now, when it comes to specific recommendations, I found it sounds great with just about every type of loudspeaker. As I've mentioned earlier, if you feel like your system is already a little warm sounding and light on detail, then the A1 may not be the best match. The only weird mismatch that I found was through KEF speakers, and I'm not sure if this is just me or a subjective thing, but through the LS50 Meta and the R3 Meta, I found that the sound was bright and boomy for some reason. It was the only brand that I couldn't get to sound good with the A1, but everything else sounded great, so it's an amplifier I can recommend to a lot of people if they feel like they could use its power. Now, with that said, it is time to give this review some context by comparing it to something else that's really good in its price range. Okay, so this is going to be a fun apples to apples comparison. I'm going to talk about how the Musical Fidelity A1 competes against a Choco Ime, an integrated amplifier that retails for almost exactly the same price. It's targeting the same customer, which is the purist 2-channel stereo enthusiast, and it's also extremely well reviewed by both owners and reviewers alike. Now, having listened to them both, they have a completely different sound, so hopefully this comparison section will help you determine which sound you think you would prefer. Now, first, I'm going to start off with a quick little breakdown of the Choco Ime and talk about how it compares to the A1. So, if you're not familiar with the Ime, Choco Sound is a Chinese company, and the product is both designed and made in China, and they follow the consumer direct business model. Now, the Ime itself is a Class AB integrated amplifier that outputs roughly 138 watts per channel into 8 ohms. And when it comes to the presentation of the Ime, what you're getting is a sound that's all about clarity, control, with incredible treble refinement and smoothness. So basically, it's best for somebody who needs that all-arounder, somebody who says, I'm an audiophile. I like audiophile things. I like clarity and control. I like big soundstage, and I love it when the treble is airy and detailed, yet at the same time easy on my ears. If that's what you want, especially if you need the extra power, then the Ime will likely be your preference over the A1. That said, the A1 by comparison is a warmer sounding integrated amplifier. The treble, although not nearly as refined and as spacious sounding, is going to be grittier. There's going to be more drive to the top end. And then the mid-range is going to sound much bigger in scale. It's going to give you this 3D-like holographic sound that the Ime just can't match. And you hear that the most in live recordings. For example, when I listen to Alice in Chains' MTV Unplugged, through the Ime, it sounds good. I think most people would agree to that. However, when you switch to the A1, it's a completely different listening experience. When people start clapping, it sounds three-dimensional, like there's a human being clapping. It doesn't just sound, well, like sound as it does through the Ime. And then when the musicians begin to play, it's more visceral, it's more present. It's as if the performers are actually in your room, whereas with the Ime, everything just sounds a little bit more laid back. Now, to the Ime's credit, it's a more resolving sounding integrated amplifier, which means when you go from a poor recording to a really good recording, the Ime better shows you what that high quality recording is capable of. So it's just a matter of choice. There's no right or wrong here. But anyways, that is how the two compare. So now let's go over some caveats, and then I'm going to wrap up this review. Okay, so before you try out an A1, there are a few things that you need to know about first before you spend your money. Number one, this integrated amplifier runs hot during operation. I mean, I'm not kidding. You could literally cook eggs or toast on top of this integrated. And what that means is for safe operation, you need to give it room to breathe, space enough for proper ventilation. That way you can get a good lifespan out of the A1. Number two, when it's powered on and playing music, it soaks up a lot of power. So if you're somebody who's worried about the environment or worried about your power bill, then the A1 may not be a good choice for you. And then number three, when it comes to heat, that brings up the question of long-term reliability. Some of you may remember the original A1 as being a very unreliable product. It's almost like an Italian sports car, right? It's something that you buy, enjoy for a few days, and then you take it right back to the shop. When I asked Musical Fidelity about the recent A1, they said, hey, look, we spent the money on the parts that will survive that kind of heat. However, they did give me a recommendation, which I'll pass to you, which is it's not the kind of amplifier that you turn on and then leave on all day long. Instead, it's meant to be powered on when you plan on sitting down and listening to music, and then you're supposed to turn it off once you're done. So if you listen for anywhere between 3 to 6 hours a day, that's fine, just so long as you power it off once you're done. They told me as long as people do that, then it should last for many, many years without any issues. Of course, this is a new product. We don't really know how that's going to play out, but so far it seems to be decent in terms of reliability. And then lastly, as with every hi-fi component, not everyone's going to like it. I mean, it's a low power integrated amplifier with a very distinct sound. Some of you are going to hate it, but those of you who get it, I think are really going to love it. And that leads me to my final thoughts. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and end this review on a completely subjective note. So here's the deal, guys. I am so happy that a product like the A1 exists for many different reasons. Number one, I think it's cool that Musical Fidelity has something in their portfolio that sounds distinctly different from the rest of their products. Then number two, I appreciate how they handled the re-release of the A1. What they did is they simply took the original design and then improved upon it in the areas where it really needed that improvement. And then they charged a reasonable price. I mean, no, it's not inexpensive by any means, but it's not as expensive as it could have been. And then lastly, and perhaps most importantly, what I like the most about the A1 is that it has this unique sound and character to it. Nowadays, I feel like just about every integrated amplifier in this price range is trying to be the jack of all trades and appeal to as many people as possible, which is a smart move, especially if you're trying to run a business. And make no mistake, there are better, well-rounded products in this price range to choose from, like say the Audiolab 7000A, the Choco Ime, the Unison Research Unico Primo. But the one thing that the A1 has that none of them has is that unique character. That 3D tube-like sounding mid-range that sounds so real, that treble that's rolled off yet at the same time strangely vivid. It's just such a unique sound. And I don't know if it's animacy perception or anamorphism, but it feels almost human in its delivery in the sense that what it does well, it excels with, but it's not perfect. And while this is a product that I definitely can't recommend to everybody, if you're somebody who doesn't need a lot of power and you like that warm tube-like sound from a solid state amp and you want that sense of realism, specifically within the mid-range, I can't think of anything better for under $2,000. So, you know what? Well done, Musical Fidelity. The A1 is a pretty darn good product. Anyways, that is going to be my take on the A1. As always, guys, thanks for watching, and until next time, peace.